Hi, and welcome to today's Venture and Capital interview. Today I have with me the founder of NeuroCare Group, Tom. Welcome to the session.
Thanks for having me.
Now, from the first time we had a chat, I knew that I wanted to do this session with you because the area that you work in is something which, I find is becoming more and more important, but also something that I'm observing more. So the longer I've been involved in this space, this area of sort of mental health was not really sort of talked about, sort of 10, 12 years ago. And so firstly, what I'd love to do is sort of ask you a bit about your background, talk about that, and then also talk about NeuroCare. And then I've got some other questions that I want to sort of go through. So just as a bit of an introduction, tell us a little bit about your background.
I was born and raised in Germany. I'm an electrical engineer and about a 25-year veteran of the healthcare industry. And I have especially built what's called vertically integrated businesses where technology and services come together. The main example is the world's largest hospital and technology group called Fresenius out of Germany. And we have built their business. I myself have built a business from 10 million to about 1.5 billion over 15 years. And now, as you say correctly, since 5 years, I am the founder of a company called NeuroCare, where my relationship with the world of psychology and mental health has come to fruition when we really also combine technology, science, medication, and all the approaches into having developed what's now called a digital therapeutics platform for mental health. So in very short, we can address very serious mental health issues like depression, ADHD, and other things within 30 sessions in 3 months, and mostly without medication and very sustainably. So yes, you're right, Steve. This in the current times, the collateral from COVID, from how the world is managing COVID, of course, one of the key collaterals will be the mental health of people.
It's the part that scares me the most about this whole process. Like for me personally, I think I mentioned this in our first chat, I switched off reading mainstream media probably about April, I think it was, end of April. And then just for my own sanity, I started listening to more and more comedians and, especially in that one, I found for me, and this is why I really find what you do quite interesting. For me, my sanity comes within exercise and just general, like I find that's my sort of balancer. And also I do my best to be as healthy as possible. About 7 years ago, I made a massive effort to lose a lot of weight. And because I realized I was basically just emotional eating. And it's not an uncommon thing for founders to start a business. And then within their first 3 years, they just go from whatever size they are to out.
How right you are. How right you are. Founders are like high-performing athletes. That's how you have to look at yourself. And what we do in mental health relates a lot to that, because really good health, as the Romans said already 2,000 years ago, mens sana in corpore sana, meaning a healthy mind can only live in a healthy body and vice versa. And that's precisely what NeuroCare does. We look at the psychological, the neurological, the biological level of your mental well-being, and whether you are really challenged, i.e. labeled with a mental affliction, or you're only really stressed and burned out, doesn't matter much, because what keeps you alive, as you yourself say, Steve, is your ability to self-regulate. And in terms of self-regulation, currently switching off a bit from the mainstream and especially the bad news and the people that see the glass always half empty makes a lot of sense. Because it is very clear, Steve, that without going into details, the way humankind is handling this crisis is unbalanced, to say the least. Meaning
1,000%.
Meaning the absolutely true and existing threat of a new virus, and the way we all of a sudden only focus on this and have almost a fear-mongering campaign, switching off everything else, whether this is other diseases, whether this is the economic, commercial, or mental collateral, is just mind-boggling, right?
Well,
and for founders,
I was going to say, just to touch on that really quickly, right? Because I noticed this really early on, and then we started, I'm sure like most companies did, we started doing team surveys and so forth. Where I got to the point that I was really frustrated with this from a mental health perspective was that when I sort of just stepped back and I was just observing news, and I was observing that, you know, especially at the start where people weren't, you know, where people were at home, and you couldn't exercise, right? Or you literally had to go, you know, you had to go outside and whatever. What was frustrating for me was that effectively every article on the media and every news item on TV or whatever it may be was that fear aspect, right? I
Fear,
did not
fear,
see
fear.
correct.
Yeah.
And there was not one single article which had, okay, here's how you build your immune system. Here's how to, you know, here's how to build your health. Here's how to, you know, here's some tips for balancing your own mental perspective.
Absolutely correct, Steve. You
Not
know,
one.
when the humankind for thousands of years has adapted to nature, and now for whatever reason we seem to think we can be victorious over nature.
Yes.
And the only solution against viral infections always and ever was a good immune system. And nobody has told people, for example, to take vitamin C, vitamin D, actually also melatonin as a highly, you know, positive supplement, and go into a sauna. Because in the old days, when you had a viral infection, to prevent viruses that are in your body or bugs to replicate and proliferate, the mix of those four things is actually best. Also, nobody, Steve, looks at mortality, so the real danger of the virus, instead of numbers of infection. And these numbers of infections make the fear-mongering campaign even worse. And also, it is unprecedented in the last few hundred years that humankind has, because of any crisis, Steve, let's say a war or another pandemic or something, has basically, in addition to the danger or the crisis we face, done a Japanese-style harakiri and killed itself in all other aspects of like stopped living, stopped the economic activity to pay for it, or, you know, focus in a differentiated way on the people to be protected, like currently the old people or people with a weak immune system or with a respiratory disease. But this one-size-fits-all general lockdown or shutdown of all aspects and areas of life is just not really helpful. And it's very dangerous, as you know, Steve, to talk, because we, the experts in healthcare, if we try and only differentiate the few, we are immediately told we are conspiracy theorists. And I think you know, especially for founders, this is very frustrating, because we are, you know, the most social people trying to create jobs and innovation. We invest our own money, and we believe in free economy and in democracy and human values and human liberties. But this fear, of course, that is overwriting everything, that is created by the mix of people in power, politicians and media, is really not letting any space for differentiation and for balance. And I personally believe we will pay a lot more, you know, than what was necessary or what is necessary. And we will pay a lot longer than what is necessary, for example, economically. Let me close with one example.
I was going to say, you're talking economically. I want to talk about socially as well after.
And economic equals social, and that's where I wanted to get to. The International Labour Organization has put out a study already in April saying they reckon we will lose 150 million jobs. Most of them in the lower, of course, you know, non-structured, like 100 million of those will be people below 30 and casual jobs. So the suicide rate in that, you know, population is, of course, much higher than the average suicide rate. That study was just updated by ILO to say that we will lose more towards 400 million jobs. If you only take that example, Steve, you can do the math yourself with about 1% plus of suicide rate, how many people we will kill literally as a collateral. And nobody talks about this.
No, and that's what sort of frustrated, and said, you're so right in that. Said that's not my area as well. I said, I'm not, you know, I said, you'll not see anything on me going online for going down conspiracy theories.
No.
I just look at it from the point of view that I was just literally just observing what was coming through the different mediums, and I was like, this is just madness. And then the other part is
it is undifferentiated, it is unsophisticated. You know, tests are not perfect. We have a lot of false positives.
Yes.
Instead of locking down, you could do tests within 20 minutes and do people only 5 or 3 days in terms of quarantine. You could be more differentiated in only locking down big mass, you know, the rugby, the footy,
But
you know, the
like,
theater.
I was
So
gonna say,
you could be a lot more differentiated.
for me, like, of course, that sort of stuff is easier in hindsight, right? When you're sort of looking at it. I just think about it from the
Correct.
perspective that build your immune system, focus on your health, let me know what supplements to take, right? Similar to you, like,
Correct.
you know, pretty much every supplement you just mentioned, I sort of doubled down on. You know, how do I build my health was the number one question. For me, you know, I'm sure like you, I used to travel a lot, right? And I know that, you know, I would be run down. Typically the times I would get sick would be when I'd be run down from traveling or from overnight flights or whatever that may be. Now, the social aspect, I think, is, you know, to me is the saddest part. And you mentioned under 30, and I want to bring that up just quickly. Actually, this is not the angle I was thinking about to go down with you, but I think it's what, since we're already down this path, there's something that come out, and I'm going to get this wrong, so apologies but they talked about how Australia's got a new program, and I think it's called the Job Maker program, where effectively for people aged between 19 to 35, I believe, if I hire someone in that age category, I'll get a $200 a week subsidy for hiring that person, because from the statistics, if someone in that age bracket doesn't work for a 2-year period, it is unlikely that they will work again. And when I heard that stat, I said, if I'm wrong on that, I'm cool, but it's something along that thesis. And I was like, that is absolute insanity to put that. And I said, I know now, like we've hired 8 people since the start of COVID, right? And I know that every time we've put out any type of job ad, there's been anywhere from 200 to 250 applicants come through. And I just sit there and think that is going to be super sad what that looks like, you know, because, you know, I know everyone's optimistic for 2021 at the moment, but when those government stimulus program, but when the government stimulus programs go, that's to me when it becomes, you know, we start to actually really see what will actually unfold.
Yes. So you're right, Steve. The mental health, people that are in jobs, and if I go back to the 400 million, you know, it's 400 million livelihoods, and they all are affected with their mental health. If you lose your purpose, if you know you don't have a job, you cannot feed your family. And how stupid and undifferentiated is it already, us or me, comparing one potentially dead person to the left with another one to the right? Every life is worth protecting the same, undifferentiated. So it's very true, Steve, we have a serious issue with the COVID virus. But to address this in a blind way and only looking at this without looking at the collateral and finding some type of balance, that's true leadership. Telling us the truth about something, looking at mortality and the real danger. We have got another example, Steve. We've got, if you and I get a new medication, it is tested maximum on a few thousand people with a clinical trial system we have developed and a regulatory law system. Now, we have got 3, 4, 5 studies globally showing that COVID-19 has a mortality of maybe 0.5%. So the mortality is not so high. The real danger is actually the overloading of our healthcare system because COVID is so contagious. And so we could have a bit more balance, and we could avoid, and I make this still on the commercial side, this example, you know, the economy, if 7 months ago, Steve, you or I would have gone out and said, we vote for doing 50 billion more debt and investing in healthcare or infrastructure or internet. So something sense-making. People would have really hung us up almost on a tree for being irresponsible. So now we throw hundreds of billions into something. And in the US, in the global context, yes, trillions. I was more referring to Australia. And we don't like differentiate anymore. So this unbalanced thing is really an issue. And to come back to us, I think for us entrepreneurs and founders, it is especially bad because future and growth depends on true innovation and not on doing the same. And if you miss growth capital because the atmosphere is full of fear, and if you cannot really create sustainable jobs, then no government subsidy program of whatever country in the world will ever replace that. So we have probably not only, you know, killed so many jobs, but we have also killed off to a large degree the potential future growth of economies, which is called innovation. And that's very sad, Steve.
I'll go there because I'm an optimist at heart, right? So, you know, it said I see all this, and then all I think to myself is, okay, what role can I have? What role can I play in making any sort of difference, right? And it might be tiny, and it might be in my world, but I'd rather be someone that's adding to a solution rather than adding to a problem.
Absolutely.
Right? So, what really appealed to me about your approach was that I said I've worked with, I've had team members that have had mental health issues. I've got a current team member that's got a basic mental health issues. And the challenge when I sort of look at that is that, how can I put it? It's, you know, I know that the process is diagnose, give pill, see how they respond, adjust dosage and so forth. And I said, this is not my area specialty, this is your area specialty. What I loved about our first conversation was that you talked about, you were bringing up conversations like breathing. You were bringing out conversations like diet. You were bringing out conversations like exercise. And even in that introduction, then you talked about sleep. You put me onto the circadian rhythm.
Sleep. I'll say it again and again. The garden bed, you know, the fertile ground of your mental health is proper sleep, because sleep regenerates both your body and your brain. And you cannot become sustainable or solve mental health issues sustainably by pills or medication in general. They mute your central nervous system or are a short-term symptom management. But to become chronically able to improve your self-regulation, as it's called, means you sleep well, you eat well, and the eat well people actually, if I can say that, it has two elements. Please look at that. One is what you think it is, meaning don't eat nonsense. But we know that in the meantime, processed food and the like. But the second element that is equally important is when you eat and how much time you leave your tummy, meaning your immune system, to regenerate. Your tummy only knows two ways of being. One is working, which is digesting, and two is regenerating. So when you're not eating, you regenerate. The world's leading researcher in that is an Indian chap called Sachin Panda. And please Google it. He does a lot. There's a nice talk at the Salk Institute, 40 minutes, where he summarizes his research, and you understand why it's so important to watch the timing of eating as well, next to what you eat. And let's go back at the beginning, Steve. People like you and me, or athletes, leaders, high performers in general, they need to be so much on song, because they might not suffer stress, burnout, or any mental affliction per se, in principle. But the way we live is we push ourselves, in a sense, constantly below zero. So you and I, we cannot be zero or average in mental health or physical health and performance. We need to be +1, so that the stress, the many balls we are juggling, does not push us below zero. And that's why you have to watch so carefully your sleep, your diet, and your exercise. And sleep.
I was going to say, like, and for you, like I said, for me, in my own discipline for myself, you know, I supplement a lot. I'll work out at least, like, this is my one day that I will not work out. So I'll work out typically 6 days a week. Lately, I said I'm incredibly white skinned. I've had skin cancers taken out of my forehead. So I used to avoid the sun a lot. So now I actually try, and I'll purposely in the late afternoon on the weekends, I'll go to a park, try and get some sun, try and get some vitamin D, supplement, all that's like, I will do everything possible. I think I said it best to a nutritionist that I work with. I'll do everything possible for mental health and physical health.
Yes, right? And that's correct. And both of them are so interdependent. And it's proven. There's a word called psychosomatic, and people have found a label for saying, your mental stress transfers to your physique. And we all know from sports always that your heart rate is up when you're excited, your heart rate variability goes down when you're excited. And when you're in stress or caught in that helicopter of being chronically stressed, then you cannot regenerate. So this regeneration or ability to improve and have good self-regulation, that has to determine your life, as in, prevention. But this is what neurocare does, as in when your self-regulation has failed, then we have means of diagnosing precisely on every level, as I said, psychologically, biologically, neurologically, and then personalizing the treatment. So you get within 3 months and 30 sessions, you get out of your predicament and can go back basically to a productive life, which is very important. And yes, I am very concerned, Steve. The fallout, mental health was a stigma, and maximum a third of mentally ill people around the world got actually treatment and attention before COVID. Now imagine how this will be post-COVID. It's mind-boggling.
Has there been any stats on that as far as how much the rise in sort of?
Not yet, but you can see also in our operations, the clinics, they haven't shut down, and so on. The demand is really rising, and overall around the world, there's the first articles coming out, but you can deduct it with examples like we made before. If we really have to forgive 400 million jobs, imagine the mental health fallout of this. So it's really something we have to watch better, and it's also why we have to, as you quite correctly pointed out, the basics were always viruses per se are fought by your immune system, so strengthen your immune system. And of course, it is true that we should go, the 1.5 meter distance, we should wash our hands, we should be very vigilant about not contributing to an accelerated, as they call it, herd immunity, which at the end of the day we need to reach with or without a vaccine, but not accelerated, because it will overload our healthcare systems. So far, so good. But what you can do yourself is, if you're not in the risk group, is really vitamin D, vitamin C, melatonin as an antioxidant, and especially the sauna. Best an infrared light sauna, because you can be exposed faster. Because whether you will be severely affected or not has to do with, let's say you get infected with COVID, and then the proliferation of the virus in your body needs to be kept at a minimum. And this is why you need a proper level of vitamin C, D, and so on. So it is said, I agree with you, that these things are not spread as much as the fear that
not as much. Sorry, you can't. Sorry, you can't even say as much. Yeah. It's not at all. Like I just said, just go and find the article that tells you that that's in any mainstream media whatsoever. I said, if someone could say, I'll be super happy to see one article.
Yeah. Or for example, other normal things, when you go for a blood test of anything, it's known that you have false positives, because no tests are always only a proxy.
Correct. That's actually one of the things that really interesting. So W, I've learned so much about so many things with Wholesale Investor, right? And of course, we've worked with a lot of diagnostic companies. It was frightening for me to learn about the sort of errors in diagnostic equipment, because for me, my understanding was you get a diagnosis, that is to be trusted, that is it. Like, we recently had a team member who basically thought they were getting a skin cancer cut out of their face, and it turned out it was a pimple. That's like the emotion. Just think about the emotional aspect.
In COVID, because we had to do it fast and dirty, the false positives are actually known to be much higher. The PCR test that is trying to tell us whether we are infected or not is simply looking for genetic snippets and reminders. And you could have been infected and already immune and this and that. I don't want to go into the details, but just say the false positives there are also very high. So, there's an accumulation of the philosophy is not balanced. We should look at mortality. The way we deal with it mechanically is partly wrong. We didn't need to shut down everything. You can test people. You can say, Steve, if you come from overseas, do a test before you board a plane and do a test after you land in Australia. And then I'll wait for 3 days, but not 2 weeks. Okay.
I just had that with my my wife, she's Korean, and she just come back from Korea and basically, had to stay in the hotel. But quick question I have for you now. your process, you were very clear that you work with people across 30 sessions. Is there a certain time frame, and why exactly 30 sessions? Now, given your German background, I imagine there's precise engineering into that process. So help me understand.
It's just like this, Steve. It's the average number of sessions for which we have what's called a response scientifically, meaning you get 50% better in your symptoms, or a remission, which means you get below the threshold of being out of your normal quality of life. So what is proven is that with the new technology of looking more precisely and then basically boosting your learning forward, your creation of new patterns, usually 30 sessions within 3 months is enough. So in scientific terms, and that is all published, we feel that we have a response of 65% in the trials and about 80% in the clinics. And we have a remission of well above 55% in the trials, or in the randomized controlled papers or retrospective studies we did. And again, in the clinics, in the day-to-day clinical work, that remission is higher again, because daily clinical work still is different and better than just the trial that you need for regulatory purposes. So yes, the summary is that usually within 3 months, 30 sessions, more than 80% of the patients respond, and we can get them out of their predicament and therefore free a family from let's say a child afflicted with true ADHD, or a person afflicted with depression, and all this. And overall also it's reasonably cost effective, because the costs for it are, I say this in Aussie dollars because it's an Australian background, around about 10 grand. And a lot of it can be paid for by Medicare, or by your private Medibank or other private healthcare insurance, depending on the single case. So yes, we have a true blockbuster on how to address mental health, stress, or improve your mental performance, which in essence is this, just the other side of the same coin. And we have formed a company. We now run 15 clinics roughly globally. We treat about 1,500 people by now. The results are scalable, and the commercial margins we can achieve are also actually very interesting for the investor side of the business. Yeah. So yes, we do have a solution, and we hope that governments increasingly look at it, because not only is what we do more measurable, more objective, and therefore goes, down a sustainable road, but also what we do can be done a lot digital or remote. Many parts of the process, or of the delivery, of the diagnosis, or so it fits into this time and age where we need to be productive and have to watch certain rules and regulations or lockdowns.
And in the sort of patients that you work with, like, what have you seen as the trends? Like, how do you handle, and this could be, and I'll speak to founders for a second, right? Because the founders that may have, employees, or they themselves may be going through their own sort of, let's call it issues, or they may have been diagnosed with different things like bipolar, ADHD, depression. What is your typical guidance as far as outside of coming to see you? What is your typical guidance as far as your first step?
Yeah. Number one, watch your sleep. Okay. Understand how you sleep best with the elements discussed. Watch your biorhythm or your circadian rhythm. Watch what you eat, when you eat, and exercise well. And go and find out what your own biochemical situation is, meaning your metabolism. What supplements do you really need? I actually want to warn also to just eat stuff, in a sense, undifferentiated and without. Have a look whether you really need a zinc or a magnesium or this or that. There's very good now genetic tests with which you can find out what your specific metabolism needs. But do the most you can in this area: nutrition, exercise, and mental sanity with sleep. If you still feel you're too stressed and you can't cope, then of course come to us and we will do a proper personal diagnosis and a personalized therapy, and we'll get you back on track pretty quickly.
Fantastic advice. And funny, you mentioned about sleep straight off the bat, and I remember when I mentioned this in our first chat. One thing that really reinforced the power of sleep, I can't remember what podcast it was. It might have even been a TED Talk, where the guy made the clear comment. He says, the greatest performance enhancing drug for athletes is sleep. And
Correct.
then they gave lots of examples of high-performing athletes that will sleep anywhere
Yes.
from 9 to 12 hours a day. I'm like, holy shit. And for me at that time, I was doing my best to get within like a 4 to 6 hour range of sleep, right? And now it's just...
adult human beings should target 8 hours sleep. If you're above 40, 50, often 7 is enough. But more important, you should get 20 to 25% REM and deep sleep of this. The best Google or the best YouTube video to watch is a guy called Matthew Walker. He's the best sleep professor actually in the world, a neurology professor. And there's a lot of 4 or 5 minutes video for the people out there where he explains why we sleep is one of the titles and how it is. So if you really want to live and do the best for yourself, dig down on sleep and Matthew Walker. Dig down on Sachin Panda and your biorhythm. That's what you can contribute yourself next to exercise and good food. And if you still feel overwhelmed, please go to our website, come to us. We can tell you basically where you stand as a baseline. And then we decode all the elements that are good or bad. And we will get you back together within a relatively short time.
And another question I have, let's go on the other side, right? So both of us are founders and both of us want to get the best performance out of ourselves. What guidance would you give for other founders that are running high? Because look, the two skill sets that I think me and you have to have is one, resilience, right? Every day Correct. We're going to deal with different challenges. You know, that's pretty much the job of a founder. And like what you said, we want to put ourselves on the limit. And that limit is typically works out to be a balance of chaos and order at the same time, right? Yes. So that's where the growth occurs. So how do we, what suggestions do you have for building that resilience? And then the last one is, I found that it's a very real issue with founders. It's a very real issue for myself. Decision-making fatigue. Because if you think about it, yourself and I will answer more questions than what most people will, most founders will, we're answering more questions than what most normal people do in one day or even in the first half of a day than what someone would in an entire week. So what would be your two keys for that as far as building resilience and also working with that sort of the issue of decision-making fatigue?
Start with a mindset, we've discussed it the last half an hour, of looking at yourself truthfully, and that means you're a high-performing leader. You're like a high-performing athlete. Your resilience needs to be above average. And that means resilient is just another word for a good self-regulation, okay? A fast self-regulation. So acknowledge that your brain works harder and works more, has more stress, more load, and therefore look at yourself in the like of a professional athlete. So sleep like them, eat like them, exercise like them, and have a higher resilience build. You can, as I said before, you know, the elements of sleep, the elements of nutrition, and so you can look it up. There's a thing called, you know, the Aura Ring, and I'm not related to them. So you can really measure your stuff and be like a professional, okay? Don't take it simple and take it very seriously.
So this has been one of my favorite sessions to do today, and one I've been excited about doing for some time. On the business front, you know, I said I'm really impressed about how fast you have grown the stage within 5 years of getting to 15 clinics, especially the ability to grow them worldwide. I know you're sort of in motion for yourself on that sort of pre-IPO, sort of IPO path, and all I'll say is, like, well done to the work that you do. For me, I said the more I want to see you succeed, it's because of how much I see it's more and more needed, especially in the space that we work, where this typically was a taboo area to talk about, but now it's sort of more and more common. And I just want to say thank you again for your time. I know, you know, we're both in different sides of the planet, so thank you very much for helping to make this session happen.
You're more than welcome. Thanks for having me. Neurocaregroup.com.
Thank you very much, Thomas. Speak soon. See ya.
Ciao.
Bye.